what all is involved in each of the positions that are in our church. So I am so glad you are all here. Thank you for taking time out of this beautiful day to be here with us. I am District Superintendent John Casper. I get to be your district superintendent for a few years here yet, and I am inviting our district lay leader, who is, well, in my experience as pastor, probably been the most involved and active district lay leader I have ever experienced. I am wonderfully grateful to have Denny Wissinger serving with me on the district in that capacity. And Denny and I have, well, it's been a bit of a journey to get this together, but we're glad to get it together, as there's much for us to come and to know. And so I'm going to ask Denny to come up. He's got a few words to say and he's going to open our time in prayer. Denny?
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pastor John. Appreciate it. And we certainly appreciate Laura being here with us this morning. Before I get into the first prayer that I prepared, I'd like to get into just the thoughts about 9/11. Wish to take this opportunity to remember the tragic events of September 11th, 2001. You most likely have been reviewing it in the news this past week, and perhaps vividly in your mind. You probably remember where you were and exactly what you were doing on 9/11. At 8:46 a.m., a plane commandeered by Al-Qaeda terrorists crashed into the North Tower of the World Trade Center. At 9:03, a second terrorist plane piloted by terrorists crashed into the South Tower in New York City of the World Trade Center. 9:37 a.m., a third plane crashed into the Pentagon. At 10:03, a fourth plane destined for the Capitol building, in which passengers overpowered the terrorists, crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania. The obvious tragedy of all this, just giving you all these numbers, was really the loss of life. There were 2,977 people killed, which included 265 on the four planes. In addition, there were over 6,000 people injured that day. At this point, please take a minute of silent prayer to remember 9/11 in your own way. Amen. Personally, when I look back at 9/11, all these plane crashes that took place within an hour and 17 minutes, I was sitting at National Airport in Washington, D.C. at the time. In fact, that's where I worked at the time. I did not hear the crash into the Pentagon, but could certainly see a lot of smoke. Let's take this opportunity now to lift up a prayer. Our heavenly and gracious Father, what an awesome God you are. We thank you for this day, knowing that every day is a gift from you. And Lord, we thank you for this opportunity to come together to learn more about the roles of and between lay leaders and clergy. We thank you for all that are here this morning, unselfishly taking time for what might be busy schedules, and for those who are not physically here, but will later be able to take advantage of a recording of this seminar. We thank you especially for all Laura Witkowski has put into the preparation for this seminar. And Lord, help us to have open minds to all that is presented and open hearts to allow your Holy Spirit to work within us to earnestly strive to more effectively serve you and your church. In your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
The right button to turn. There we go. Heyo. Thank you so much, Denny. I appreciate that moment of remembrance. I was actually in college during 9/11, which it had a pretty big impact on me then. All right. Hi, friends. Welcome. Welcome. I do want to let you know that there are a couple handouts. So if you don't have those, some of them were left on chairs. There's one that is a feedback form that I would love if you would fill that out at the end. And then there's one that's a handout that you can just use to follow along with and go from there. So if you don't have one and you want to, commandeer one from another chair, please do. There you go. And some of those other handouts are actually for tomorrow's worship. So don't worry about those handouts. Maybe put them under your chair. All right. Okay, as many of you may or may not know, I'm Laura Wachowski. I'm the Associate Director for Lay Leadership Development for the Michigan Conference. I'm actually starting my 9th year with the conference. I used to work for the West Michigan Conference before we merged. And then I've been in this position since we merged and became one conference. So I'm just really pleased to be with you all today. This role of the lay leader is such an important one, and I'm grateful that the Central Bay District is taking some time to really focus on it. Listening over the past few years in my role, it's become clear that the role of the lay leader can be a little bit of a mystery and maybe not so clear. So I'm hoping today we can unravel a little bit of that mystery. But here's the most important thing I want you to know. If you get anything out of this morning, this is it. I'm giving it to you right off the bat. The most important part of being a lay leader is collaborating and building a healthy relationship with the pastoral leader of your faith community. That's really what it all boils down to, collaboration and a healthy relationship. So hopefully this morning you'll hear some expectations of the lay leader, you'll hear some ideas of how to be the best lay leader you can be, and then there's no doubt we're going to learn from each other. There's some interactive pieces here, and I don't know everything, right? None of us do, and so I think we're going to learn a lot from each other as well. So let's start with this short video. So to me, that feels like a good reminder of why we're here, right? I think you may have covered a few hospitality items when you were out there getting your refreshments, but I just wanted to say if you need to stand up, if you need to step out, if you need to get a refreshment, feel free to do that as you need. We will have a break this morning a little bit later on. And then this morning is being recorded, so if you need to refer back to something or if you want to share it with somebody else, that will be available on the district website at some point in the near future. I'm happy to share the slides afterwards. If you want a copy of those, I can get those out to you as well. So our time together this morning is going to include the history of the lay leader, why do we have lay leaders, some practical details like, what are those clear responsibilities that we know, some suggestions that I've kind of picked up along the way. I did a survey not too long ago this summer for lay leaders, and so I picked out a few nuggets from those as well. And then we'll have some time for just kind of general questions at the end. So let's start with the history of the lay leader in general in the United Methodist Church. I don't want to spend a lot of time on this, but I feel like it's worth covering. It is fully covered on resourceumc.org and all of our other United Methodist sites. But I think it's always good to review how we got here, right? Nearly all the leaders of the early Methodist societies were lay people. How exciting is that? John Wesley established a system to develop and empower them by organizing them into small groups for accountability and support for living the Christian life. The intent was to help people become disciples who live out their love of God and neighbor. That's kind of where we started. Leaders appointed by Wesley were laypersons who could be trusted with the spiritual formation and care of others, right? They served as role models, mentors, discipleship coaches for the early Methodists. These leaders shared in the pastoral work that needed to be done when the appointed clergy or circuit rider was absent. So in the beginning, we had circuit riders that would travel from church to church kind of in a large area. And when that pastor was traveling, there were lay folks there that were, kind of taking up that mantle and doing what they needed to do in the meantime. They were really disciples who made disciples. The general rules that were followed are simple and straightforward practices intended to help people live out the teachings of Jesus in Matthew 22, 37 to 40. I'm just going to read that scripture. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. This is the greatest and first commandment. And the second is like this: you shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets. So that was part of their general rules that they used in this kind of circuit rider time period of the Methodist Church. They formed habits. These class members formed habits that we're pretty familiar with today as United Methodists, but let's review those of first, do no harm. Second, doing good to all people. And then third, attending upon all the ordinances of God, which means participating in worship, receiving communion, reading the Bible, praying and fasting. Sometimes we get a little hung up on that. What are ordinance of God? Like, what does that mean? And that's what that's referring to. Worship, communion, reading your Bible, praying and fasting. And then each time that these groups met, they were sure to ask each other, how is it with your soul? How is it with your soul? So we're going to practice that. Yay, audience participation. We're going to take 5 minutes, and I just want you to ask your neighbor, just turn to somebody next to you or near you, and ask them, how is it with your soul? If you don't know each other, share your name, share your church. If you're clergy or lay, that would probably be helpful. Be sure both people have a chance to answer. If If one person is talking a little bit too much, then I'm going to say about halfway through, okay, it's time to switch. So just be listening for that too. So we're going to take 5 minutes. Ask your neighbor, how is it with your soul? Go. Got about 3 minutes left. 3 minutes. might start wrapping up your conversations. All right. That was great. I enjoyed hearing you all. I don't get to be in a church very often anymore. Everything's on Zoom, so this is fantastic. Doesn't that question just make you feel loved when somebody asks you, how is it with your soul? Like, it's such a deep and profound question. You can't help but feel loved. And by meeting together in this way every week, they were really watching over one another in love in those class meetings. John Wesley observed, quote, "Advice or reproof was given as need required. Quarrels were made up, misunderstandings removed, and after an hour or two spent in this labor of love, they concluded with prayer and thanksgiving." And he said this in a plain account of the people called Methodists. So it was really profound and it was really impactful, and we sort of gotten away from that a little bit, and so I just kind of wanted to mention that particular part of the history. Then I came across a paper called Sharing Pastoral Power. I love coming across these kinds of things in my work. Sharing Pastoral Power, Wesleyan Foundations for Lay Leadership by David Lowes Watson. David is a retired elder in the Tennessee Conference of the United Methodist Church, and in his paper, he shares about sharing this pastoral power. So he says, the first phase in the late 18th and 19th centuries was led by a combination of itinerant circuit riders, and on the other by class leaders and local lay preachers. Given the logistics of colonial and frontier life, the circuit riders were necessarily absent for long periods of time as they traveled around. So this meant leaving a great deal of the worship to lay preachers and much of the pastoring to these class leaders, these small group leaders. These exceptional laymen and women led the foundations for the great expansion of Methodism during the later 19th century, and we remain deeply in their debt. Then he goes on to say, this is the part I found pretty interesting. The second phase began in the 1830s and 1840s when circuit riding gave way to stationed appointments. So clergy were now appointed to a church rather than, traveling around. And when clergy assumed full pastoral responsibility for established congregations, we didn't have those class leaders taking on that role anymore, the pastors were. While this transition made Methodism a major force in North American Christianity, it also made preaching the focus of ministry and mission of the church. Accordingly, the need for leadership among laity was greatly reduced. Class leaders became less important, as did lay preachers, and with various adjustments, this has really remained our pattern ever since, for a variety of reasons, right? Life is very different now than it was in the 1830s. So there's a whole bunch of reasons why that's changed, but I just found that to be really interesting. So this is a brief summary, super brief, of how we got here in 2021. So what does laity really mean? What does that term layperson, laity, what does that mean? I actually get this question quite a bit when people outside of the church ask what my job is. And I say, I do lay leadership development, and they're like, I have no idea what that means. So it's common for people to not quite understand what that means. But really, laity means the people of God. It means the people of God. The terms lay or laity are derived from Greek terms, laos theou, meaning simply the people, and laikos, meaning the mass of common people in contrast to their leaders. So that also means that throughout time, we realize that lay has come to mean inexpert, amateur, inexperienced, or ordinary, right? That's like the negative connotations that you get from the term laity. But in her book, Synergy, which I have up here, fantastic book, I really recommend it. On a break, if you want to come flip through it, feel free. In her book, Synergy, Ann Michael recognizes that when it comes to matters of inclusiveness, words matter. Words matter. Laity equals the people of God. She asked the reader to spend some time unpacking the various meanings of the term lay and laity in the church and in our culture. The question she asks is, how can we reclaim the biblical meaning of laity as the people of God? How can we reclaim that? She goes on to say, it's the laying on of hands in baptism, not the laying on of hands in ordination, that authorizes a life of ministry. Hopefully I don't get in trouble for saying that, but it's true. The laying on of hands of ordination is a different kind of ministry, right? The laying on of hands in baptism is what authorizes us as lay people in a life of ministry. So I want you to take a minute to kind of think about that question, kind of let it reverberate in your brain a little bit. How can we reclaim the biblical meaning of laity as the people of God, rather than amateur or inexperienced? So we're going to take 5 minutes again, turn to a different neighbor this time. So turn like the opposite way that you just did, or behind you, or in front of you. Again, share your name, church, clergy, or lay if you don't know each other, and just reflect on this question. Just kind of take some time to, talk with each other about what this could be. How can we reclaim the biblical meaning of laity as the people of God? Just be sure both folks have a chance to kind of speak. So it's not necessarily this is right and this is wrong. It's just a conversation that I want you all to have with each other. All right, 5 minutes. We got about a minute left. 1 minute. All right, start wrapping up your conversations. All right, this is great. You guys must have a lot of great ideas. I love it. And in fact, I would love it if we could hear some of those. If there's anyone who wants to share their voice and share their reflection of their conversation or their own reflection, I'm going to take some notes. I would love to hear what you're all thinking. And I think we got a microphone, right, to pass around? Thank you. Who wants to go first? Oh, in the back here.
This question, Pastor Melanie Wilson Newhart in Saginaw. This question stirred me, and I think just looking at reclaiming the people of God, I think team building is the core of that, and I think equipping, encouraging, and also helping them to identify when a genuine and authentic love emerges. And what does that look like? We always say we're supposed to be the hands and feet of Christ, but what does that really look like? And are we living it out in tangible and ways that people can identify that they will know we are Christians by our love? I think the foundation of that goes a long way in equipping laity.
Yeah, thank you. That's fantastic. Who's next?
I'm Pam Harkema with Escoda. We just felt like laity don't understand this part, that they really don't understand their role in the life of the church. That what we found is that people think that laity is anybody who's not pastor, and that's just a title. It doesn't come with any responsibility. So what we're looking at is intentional ways that we can engage people in the mission of the church by giving them a task to do that gives them a start on this. But this information, sharing this information, educating laity about what it means to be laity might help steer them in a new direction.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm Pastor Albert from the Salem United Methodist Church in Pigeon. And I begin with the premise that the laity is still the people of God. Though we may have missed some things and lost some things over the years, over the decades, the laity is not divorced from God. They are still the people of God. To reclaim some of the things that we've lost, emphasizing the priesthood of all believers, that we are all ministers. The ordained ministry is just one type of ministry among all of the ministries. To see ourselves as ministers and to emphasize in our various congregations our various gifts and passions, because we all are called to different ministries. in our congregation, every year we pass out this form, the all members in ministry form, where members commit to doing something based upon their calling and their passions. So if we emphasize the fact that we are all ministers in the church, and we all have roles to play for, like Paul said, you may be the finger, you may be the head, another person may be the toe or the ear. But it takes the participation and the involvement of all of us to have a wholesome ministry. I think if we emphasize that as a congregation, the laity would not see the clergy as being responsible for everything, and then we have no role to play.
Yep.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. How about one more? Over here.
Any chance that this is a non-pastor? Good.
I'm David Odell from Ames, and I'm the lay leader there.
Yay.
New to this job, but as a lay person, we need to tell our story. And everybody has a story. And my story started at State Street. And I had failed nursing school. And I was walking through the parlor all by myself, and this voice came. Go back to school. I will not let you fail. I went back to school, and I was a registered nurse for 28 years. But it took me 25 years before I told that story. And once I told that story, God let me free. So tell your story, not be afraid to tell your story. God will help you do that. My wife was lay leader at State Street, and I was amazed at the things that she could do. And I always ask her, how did you do that? And she said, God was there. He told me what to say.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you. I don't know why I'm here. You all got it. Yeah, I am a huge believer in telling your story. And I was listening to a podcast on the way here, actually, from a historian, John Meacham, and he was talking about how we learn and we process things as humans through stories. Of course we do, right? And that's a huge part of being a layperson, is telling your story. Yeah, thank you. So why do we have lay leaders? Here's some possibilities. We are called. We are called. Lay people are called. Lay and clergy are equally called by God. Full stop. I can't tell you how many times in my life I've had folks say, oh, you should be a pastor. Oh, you should go to seminary. That is not my calling. I've not been called by God to do that. I have been called by God to be a layperson and do what I can in that ministry. Here's a hot take. Maybe God didn't intend for apostles, evangelists, and pastors to be professionals, right? To be that professional thing. Maybe that wasn't the intention. I don't know. It's a possibility. We do know that a great lesson from the early church is that the apostles couldn't do it alone. They couldn't do it alone, and neither can our clergy and pastors, right? They can't do it alone either. We shouldn't expect them to. All right, so let's move on to the real nitty-gritty, but nuts and bolts of the practical pieces of being a lay leader. And then after the break, we're gonna go a little bit further, a little bit deeper, kind of outside of these checklist type of things. So the Book of Discipline and all of our United Methodist literature goes into great detail about these pieces. And I feel like it really works as a checklist, right? It tells you okay, you should do this, you should do this, you should do this. I do have some of those pieces with me. Unfortunately, I did forget my Book of Discipline. Sorry about that. But guidelines like these little booklets that United Methodist Church produces, These are really helpful, but they are very much like a checklist, right? So you can like get your clear roles, you can get your clear responsibilities out of these things, but as far as like relationship type stuff, I'm not sure you're gonna get that out of these, but they're very helpful. There's a whole series of these booklets. I brought my little display here. And these are every role in the church: staff, parish, committee chair, let's see, finance committee, higher education and camping ministry. And I may not recommend going out and buying one of these today because we're just in this weird general conference quadrennium space right now. So these are from 2017 to 2020, but I do have all of these as a PDF. And so if there's one that you really feel like would be beneficial for you or for somebody in your church, send me an email and I can get that to you as a PDF rather than having you like purchase this whole big thing. Or you can also just purchase a single guideline. They're all from Cokesbury. Another really good kind of checklist type of thing, it's called Job Descriptions and Leadership Training in the United Methodist Church, a Leader Development Guide. I actually just came across this recently, which amazes me. I know about all these resources, and I was like, oh, I've never heard of this one. But this was really good too. It's very similar to these kind of booklets, but it's all in one place. So there's every job description in here for every role in the church, and then it gives a little bit kind of an extra intro stuff in it too. So that's really helpful. So if you want to come up and kind of thumb through any of these during a break, feel free. But most of what this next little section is going to be really comes from that material that the United Methodist Church provides for us. So, practical details and responsibilities. Represent the laity in the congregation. Work with the clergy or pastor for the mission and vision of the congregation. So, especially like in a larger church, they say that a person can only have like 100 connections with, I've heard this before and I can't remember where it came from. So in larger churches, the pastor is not going to be able to see every single layperson in their church. Like if you have a church of 100 or more, that's just really hard to do. And so if you have a lay leader that can really connect with everyone in your, not everyone in your congregation, but a lot of people in your congregation, they can really represent that congregation when they're having conversations with the pastor. That's an important role, is representing the laity of your congregation. Work with the clergy or pastor and other leaders to launch or strengthen ministries that build discipleship. Again, we can't do this alone. So it's a lot of working with your clergy, your pastor, your other leaders, collaborating on things, working to launch and strengthen ministries within your congregation. Inform the congregation about opportunities available. Inform the congregation of training opportunities provided by the annual conference. There is just a wealth of training opportunities available out there right now. I think that is a positive of our experience in the pandemic. So much stuff has gone online. So much stuff is available to us. I sign up for things all the time that I know I can't be there the day of, but I watch the recording later, right? There's just so much stuff out there. And if you're not getting newsletters, if you're not checking the website, if you don't get, MyConnect, which some of the people in our churches may not, the lay leader is really helpful to get that information out to the rest of the congregation. We quite often will send these things to pastors, but they got a lot on their plate. Like they really do. Sometimes this stuff slips through their email, and so if you as a lay leader can really focus on that kind of stuff, that's one less thing that your clergy person doesn't necessarily have to worry about. Meet regularly with the clergy or pastor to discuss the state of the church and opportunities for ministry to advance the mission and ministry of the congregation in the community. Let the pastor know of the needs expressed for a more effective lay ministry in the community. I've heard time and time again, laity can go where clergy and pastors can't always go, right? Like we all have jobs outside of our church. We're talking with people outside of the church all the time. Those are just spaces that clergy just can't get into, right? They can't walk into an office building and like talk to all the people there. And that's why it's important to have laity in that sense. So when you're finding out these things and when you're having these conversations, meet regularly with your pastor or clergy and just let them know what you hear, right? Just have those conversations. Pray. Pray for the pastor or clergy. I hear this a lot. Our pastors don't always have prayer partners in their congregations, which is a little disturbing to me. They have to look elsewhere to have a prayer partner or in their covenant group when we should really have one person in all of our congregations that is praying with the pastor, praying for the pastor. Like that's what they're focused on. And then, of course, pray for the congregation, pray for the community. That's a big part of all that we do, not just lay leaders, right? Like anybody can participate in that. Continued involvement in study and training. Be a lifelong learner. We don't know everything. We just don't. The fact that you're here today, check, right? You've already done that responsibility. That's a good sign. Develop a growing understanding of the types of ministries that will most effectively fulfill the church's mission and that will help strengthen the leader's own work. And this basically means like have an understanding of your community, right? Like know the needs of your community, what would be an effective ministry. Again, you don't have to do this alone, right? Like you have a whole congregation that you can have these conversations with. It's just important that somebody's developing this understanding of their congregation or their community. Engage in spiritual practices that build a relationship of attentiveness to God's will and direction. Serve as a role model of Christian discipleship for the congregation. Others will take notice when you are engaged in spiritual practices. This is a big piece of who we are as Christians, is these spiritual practices. And if the congregation is being asked to do them and you as a lay leader are not doing it, well, why should other people do it if you're not going to do it? Be a model in those spiritual practices. And for folks who haven't really found a spiritual practice that works for them, maybe you could have a class in your congregation on the different kinds of spiritual practices. And then folks in your congregation can say, oh yeah, that one would really work for me. And that could really transform a whole lot in your congregation. Plan with other leaders in the congregation for celebrating the ministry of the laity. Throughout the year, right? Let's do this often, not just once, but especially on Laity Sunday. Laity Sunday is traditionally the third Sunday of October. This year, it's October 17th. It doesn't mean that you only have to, celebrate laity on that Sunday, but if you can't figure out another time in your year to do it, that's a good kind of staple to have of the third Sunday of October. And in that, you could do a whole variety of things. It could be, a full laity-led worship. I honestly would maybe not do it when the pastor's on vacation. I don't see Laity Sunday as a way to give the pastor a Sunday off because they need to be there too for that celebration of their congregation, right? So don't think of it as that way, but laity should really be heavily involved in that celebration and in that worship. And again, there's lots of resources that are available to kind of work through what that could look like. Lay leaders are encouraged to be certified lay servants. It is not necessary, but it is encouraged. I can't speak highly enough about our lay servant ministry program in Michigan. We've worked really hard over the last 2 years to really come together as a state, make sure that, our districts have everything they need. Essentially, the Certified Lay Servant Program has 3 steps to it, and it involves taking a series of courses. To be a certified lay servant, you would take a basic course, which essentially just kind of is an overview about the United Methodist Church, about spiritual gifts, an overview about lay leadership, and then you have to take what we call an advanced course, which would be something that's a little bit more focused. It would be a course on discovering your spiritual gifts, or United Methodist structure and polity, or leading prayer, those types of courses. So once you take those 2 courses, there's some paperwork to fill out, and then you would be a certified lay servant. From there, you could go on to be a certified lay speaker, which means that you would take some courses on preaching. You'd be able to preach a couple times and then have people evaluate your preaching. And then in that case, you could be available to preach at other churches around you, or however far you're willing to travel. Not all certified lay speakers do that. Some just preach in their own church, and that's okay too. And then from there, you could go on to become a certified lay minister, or what we call a CLM. And that requires a pretty rigorous series of classes. I'm not going to lie, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. I feel like in the United Methodist Church, we really value education, and this is a piece of that. This is a piece of educating laity. And from there, if you're a CLM, you could go on to be assigned to a local church as their in a pastoral role. So you'd still be considered laity, but you could be assigned to a local church. So lay leaders don't have to go through any of this. They don't have to be a certified lay servant, but it's certainly an option. And we always have classes running in our state. They usually start in the fall, and they'll go through maybe December, and then another series of classes will start in January, and then another series of classes will start like in April. So, there's always kind of something happening across our state. Again, a positive of the pandemic, we've been able to do a lot of those courses online. And so we have folks in one district taking courses, in the Northern Waters district up in Traverse City, because it's all online. And so that way they don't have to travel. So if they're looking for a specific class they have to take, you don't have to be limited to your own district. There's 2 booklets back there on the table, actually. One, I had a couple leftover 2020 lay servant ministry brochures. These have good information in it. Not much has changed in the new brochure, so if you do get this one, you're not missing out on a ton of information. But there are 2021 lay servant ministry catalogs back there if you wanted to learn a little bit more about that program. Yeah. Yeah.
I have a few of these available here. I'll put on the back table. But there are classes that will be starting this fall. Some are basic, some are online, and there are some advanced classes. So please see me, talk to your people. Becoming a certified lay servant is really important.
Mm-hmm.
It's a good thing to do.
Yeah, so she happens to have a nice list of lay servant ministry classes in the Central Bay District. So if you're really interested in that, she's got a couple, you can go see her, she's got a couple papers of what those classes are. They're also available in a list online, and I'll give you those resources a little bit later. Okay, so those are a very slimmed down version of the responsibilities. It feels like a lot, but again, you're not doing it alone. The lay leader doesn't have to do all of these things, right? They can kind of get a team of people together to kind of do some of these. But that's essentially like the core responsibilities of a local church lay leader. Some more practical details. They are members of a couple of committees and teams in their own local church. They are a member of the Charge or Church Conference that happens annually. The Charge Conference kind of sort of directs the work of the church. It gives general oversight to the church council. It reviews and evaluates the mission and ministry of the church. It sets salaries for pastors and clergy. It elects members to other groups, other committees in their congregation. It recommends candidates for ordained ministry. And then it also recommends candidates for lay speakers and certified lay ministers. So they're a member of that. They are expected to attend that and vote and all of those kinds of things. They are a member of the leadership team, so this looks a little different in churches these days. If you have your kind of traditional administrative board, church council, then chances are you also have a separate pastor, staff, parish relations committee, you have a separate finance committee, you have a separate trustees committee, you know, kind of all those things. So the lay leader in that case would be expected to be on the church council, staff, parish, and finance. If you have a structure of the simplified accountable structure, so you have one board that's not a representative board, the lay leader is expected to be on that, but then there's not necessarily those other two committees that are meeting because they're usually kind of wrapped into that single accountable board. So it looks a little bit different depending on what your church structure is. And then they're also expected to be on the nominations and leadership development team. This is the team that nominates and finds folks for all your different committees and all your different responsibilities to, you know, be on the missions team or be on the leadership team or, you know, something like that. They are on that committee as well. I don't have this on the screen, but it is possible that they could also serve as the lay member of annual conference. That's not always the case, but it is certainly a possibility, especially in some of our smaller churches. The lay leader can also be the lay member to annual conference, which essentially means each congregation elects at least one lay member to annual conference. When we have our annual conference, we always want to have equal numbers of clergy and lay. And so based on the amount of clergy that you have appointed to your church is how many lay members that you have. We've changed our formula a little bit over the last couple of years, and I think a new formula change is happening. So I don't quite have that specific up-to-date information, but we try real hard to make sure that at our annual conference, you know, our governing body every year of our conference, that we have equal clergy and lay. And so we want all of our churches to have at least one lay member there. All right, how do you become a lay leader? So first, you do have to be a professing member of the local church. You can only be a lay leader in the church where your membership resides. And then you are elected annually at your church or charge conference. There are no term limits on a local church lay leader. So you might want to consider that in your own local church. Maybe really think of this as an annual thing because you have to elect them annually anyway. So maybe every year, if you've had a lay member who's been your lay leader for 30 years, maybe it's time to see who else is there at your next church conference. That could be the next lay leader because there are no term limits. So these are the real nuts and bolts, practical details. And we're about to take a break, but before we do that, I want to see if there's any questions about kind of any of that stuff. What do you have so far? And that doesn't mean I have to answer these questions. There are enough laity or people of God in the room that can answer them as well. So any questions, any thoughts that are bubbling up just based on those responsibilities and then kind of the history that we talked about? Looks like everybody's ready for break. All right, let's take a 15-minute break. Feel free to get some refreshments, stand up, walk around. Oh, I do want to say there's a table out there that has all kinds of little booklets on it. Those are all free. Take what you want. They've been in my office for 2 years, obviously not doing anything special because I haven't been in my office. I don't want to take any of that home, so take whatever you need off of that table. All right, 15 minutes. Am I back? There we go. Now I'm back. I do want to say there's plenty of refreshments. So even before, like when you're on your way out the door today, take some with you, right? Like I don't want to take the booklets back. They don't want to keep the refreshments. So same thing. All right, welcome back. So now we know how we got here. We know the practical piece of being a lay leader, so now we're going to spend the next hour just kind of digging a little deeper. And these are essentially like, I call them suggestions. They're like suggestions, tips. And I say that because I am not the end-all, be-all authority on this topic. These are just some things I've picked up along the way. Like I said, I conducted a survey this summer of lay leaders, and I pulled some good information from folks who are actual lay leaders, which I thought was helpful. And so it's a combination of kind of all kinds of things. So I'm hoping like this section will really help you be the best lay leader you can be. So these are also in no particular order. I don't like to order things because that, I don't know, my priority might not be the same as somebody else's priority. However, I did start with pray. Pray regularly. Pray with the pastor. We know that prayer provides strength to commit and share faith. The second one, communicate, discuss, chat, meet, communicate, communicate, communicate. Regular communication is a major trust builder. So the survey that I did, and I asked a series of questions, and one of them was, what would you recommend to foster collaboration between the lay leader and the pastor or clergy? And 78% of those people used one of these words. Communication, meeting, collaboration, discuss, chat. I can't stress how important that is. We have to communicate with each other. In an article, Ways to Improve Communication with the Pastor or Clergy, came from churchcommunications.com. It was written by Katie Allred. And I pulled a couple things from that I thought were helpful in how you're communicating and what you're communicating. So the first one they talked about was align your objectives. Look towards aligning ideas with your pastor. Let them know your plans for the church, right? Let them know what you think, and then share thoughts and ideas, and allow them to share thoughts and ideas as well, right? It's a two-way street. It's not just a one-way street. And really what we're trying to do is share ideas for the benefit of the church. This is not our church, it's God's church. We want to share ideas for the benefit of the church, not for our individual selves. The next one, ask for support. Let the pastor or clergy know your weakness or the weakness of your ministry so that they can help. And if you're sharing your weakness, chances are they're going to share their weakness, and then you can really help each other out, right? But if you don't share that, then you don't know. Get to know your pastor or clergy. Build a relationship. Show interest in their experiences. They love their church. They love their laity. They love their congregation. And they need that back, right? Learn a little bit about them. Learn about their vision. Learn about their family. Learn about where they went to seminary. All of those things. Communication is an act of conveying a message to another person. it's only possible if the persons are willing to be involved in that communication with each other, right? So for that to be possible, you have to build a relationship with your pastor or clergy. See your pastor as human. Human beings are not perfect. We are always, always flawed. If you show your pastor that you can support them, then they know they can count on you. And that just goes a long way, right? See them as human. They're just like you. All right, and then next is collaborate. Here's a short video on the importance of collaboration that you don't need to hear me say all these things, so we're going to watch this video.
Hey. Woo. Hey.
Some problems are just too big and too complex for any one person to handle alone. For these challenges, we need to collaborate. But what does that mean? Collaboration is more than just working together with others. To really work together effectively, especially when resources are tight, we need to invest in good collaboration. Good collaboration means sharing the responsibilities, risks, benefits, and the credit. Good collaboration also means that everyone who is involved works toward a common goal. To do that, we need to know our limitations, leave our ego at the door, keep an open mind, be physically and mentally present, ensure everyone has an equal voice, invest trust to get trust, step out of our comfort zone, value each other's contributions. There are many benefits of a good collaboration, such as engaged and empowered members, increased capacity to solve complex problems, strong relationships grounded in trust, honesty, and respect, efficient use of resources, and a greater overall impact. Remember, we are stronger when we work together. Alone, we can do so little. Together, we can do so much.
So that came from the Crime Prevention Council of all things, but I thought it was a really great video on collaboration and what it can look like. Other suggestions, build trust, right? We can't get very far without trust in each other. Be flexible in your ideas. Your idea might be great. It might be the best idea you've ever heard. But if you're not flexible, you might miss out on somebody else's idea that might be the best idea, right? Be flexible. Commit yourself to leadership development, to growing your faith, to sharing your faith, all the things as best you can. Life happens, right? We're all very busy people, and so sometimes we can commit ourselves as best we can. And that's all you can do. You don't have to commit to every little tiny thing. Just do what you can and do it well and commit to it. Have generous assumptions. This phrase comes from researcher and speaker and author Brené Brown. Assume that others are doing the best they can. Be generous with your assumptions. Don't automatically think that, your pastor is out to get you because they, said something that they shouldn't have or something. I don't know. Be generous with your assumptions. And then be compassionately honest with the pastor when there are problems that need to be addressed, right? We are humans in this church, and so there's always going to be some issues. There's always going to be some problems. But be honest with your pastor, but also be compassionate when you're sharing that. The lay leader is both a filter and a funnel, providing feedback that adds valuable information the pastor needs. Lay leaders must remind the church, remind the congregation, that the laity and clergy have more in common than what separates us. The pastor's role is to not please everyone. What? The pastor's role is to not please everyone. Pastors are vulnerable humans just like all of us. So if you're using some compassion, some empathy, and that honesty, and that, hard things you have to share, just kind of keep all that in mind. Strengthen your ability to discern. This really came up for me recently. I was reading an article, which I think actually was in our conference newsletter, from Susan Beaumont from the Congregational Consulting Group. And she wrote this article about from decision-making to discernment. And she talked about how in the last, 18, 19 months, whatever, we've had to make some quick decisions, right? We've had to really pivot on everything. We couldn't wait to do stuff. We had to make quick decisions to get us through this pandemic. Well, now we kind of need to back up a little bit, and we need to do some discernment. We didn't use that discernment quite as much in the last 2 years. Now we need to kind of get that back, use some discernment, slow down our decision making. And so here are 5 practices that can help strengthen your discernment muscles of your leadership. I just really think that for the time we're in now, this is a really important skill to build up. And as Susan Beaumont shared, this will invite a soulful shift among leaders. All right, the first one, broaden your focus. Decision-making begins with a narrowly defined problem. We have this kind of narrow problem that we're looking to solve. An example, should we resume our 8:30 a.m. traditional worship service now? We haven't done it for a while because of the pandemic. Now I think we can. Should we resume that? And when an opportunity is framed kind of in this narrow way, it invites kind of a simple debate about pros and cons, why we should, why we shouldn't, of just this one single option. We will likely ask some narrow questions like, do we have adequate space to ensure safety? Does our staff have the capacity to support bringing this worship back, right? Those are still kind of narrow questions that we would ask. Shifting towards discernment would require a broader framing of this issue. So that would shift us to these types of questions when we're talking about, bringing back this 8:30 traditional worship. How have the worshiping needs of our community shifted during the pandemic? That's a broader question. What practices will help people connect with God in a new environment post-pandemic? What shifts in worship venue or time do our concerns suggest? Right? These are a little bit broader questions rather than, should we bring it back? Do we have adequate space? Do we have the capacity? Maybe our worshiping needs have completely shifted than what they were before, but we would not have considered that in this narrow focus. So broadening our focus slows down the decision-making process, which I know is very frustrating. I get it. But a slower process may temporarily add to our feelings of being overwhelmed, we're all kind of in this overwhelmed state right now, that's true. But it will also invite a more discerning stance. A broader framing of the issue opens us up to consider nuanced options and possibilities beyond the limits of a problem-solving stance, right? There's the discernment stance, and then there's the problem-solving stance. One is a little bit narrower, one will broaden us up a little bit. So framing your focus of your discernment may take more time than any other phase of your process. Your options for framing the challenge are limitless, right? And that's what takes time. When you have all these options ahead of you, it takes forever to figure that out. And each of those options will take your leaders down a different path. So that's why it takes a little bit of extra time. But if you take extra care in this early stage, then your later dialogue is productive and it's relevant. Because you're not in this narrow problem-solving focus. You've had all these broad questions that you've had a chance to consider and ask. And so all your later dialogue is going to be much more productive because you went through all of this in the beginning of that question asking. All right, second one. Ground your decision in guiding principles. A discernment process is grounded in guiding principles or values that are important to the congregation. The guiding principles create meaningful boundaries for a conversation. A guiding principle might come from Scripture, it might come from the mission of your church, it might be a core value. For example, before brainstorming possible options of whatever you're trying to decide, a leadership body might agree on a statement like this. This is just a possibility. Any viable option must promote the safety of the community, allow meaningful engagement of both the in-person and online communities, embrace our tradition of excellence in music and arts, and honor our worship traditions. So this church would have these 4 grounding principles. And any questions that they ask about this would need to kind of point back to these grounding principles. Same thing goes for like visioning. When you're going through a vision process, the very first thing I ask the congregation is, have you determined your values? Do you know what's important to you? If you haven't determined your values or your guiding principles, your grounding principles, man, getting to that vision is just going to be even harder because it could be anything. It could be anything. But if you as a congregation know your values, you know who you are, you know your identity, you know what those grounded principles are, you can like take all of those questions and point back to all those things. And that will kind of help frame those decisions. The next one, shed ego and bias. Whew, this one's hard. This one's hard. Shedding involves naming and laying aside anything that might prevent the group from focusing on God's will as the ultimate outcome in decision making. So we name and then we release unhelpful biases and ego investments in outcomes. This occurs before we brainstorm or before we weigh possible options. We ask ourselves, I love this question. What needs to die in me, or what needs to die in us, for God's gifts and direction to find room in this decision? Whew. If we're shedding our ego, if we're shedding our bias, that's making room for God's gifts in the direction we're going to take next. A group considering changes in a worship venue might acknowledge and release any assumption that in-person engagement is more authentic than online engagement. They got to let go of that bias. That's not necessarily true. The pastor might release their ego investment in attaining pre-pandemic worship numbers, right? Gosh, before the pandemic, we had 200 people. Now we have 100 people. They gotta let that ego go in order to make room for God's voice. A lay leader might let go of their preference for the intimacy of worship in a chapel setting. That may be their preference, but is that safe right now, right? I mean, maybe in the particular community it might be. But letting go of that and being open to other possibilities is huge. All right, listen for promptings of the Spirit. A variety of practices exists for attending to the Holy Spirit's movement and decision making. So these practices would be, some of those spiritual practices that we talked about earlier in responsibilities of a lay leader. So, taking a decision through a spiritual practice. The example from the article of Susan Beaumont that this comes from, I found to be very helpful. So a group might use the Ignatian practice of consolation and desolation, which, by the way, was so weird when I was putting this together. My pastor that Sunday actually preached on consolation and desolation. And I was like, what? How did he know that I was doing this? Anyway, sitting in prayer with each viable option, participants notice where they encounter the movement of consolation. And that means feeling directed from beyond themselves, feeling, being drawn into community, feeling inspiration, feeling restored, balanced, refreshed, and energized. So they're sitting with this decision, and they're just kind of feeling where they're being pulled into that kind of beyond themselves, drawn into the community. The other side, group members might note the options that move them toward desolation, which means turning inward, being drawn toward negative feelings, feeling cut off from the community, giving up on important values, feeling drained of energy. So when you're sitting with that decision, each person would kind of feel, okay, which way am I being pulled? What decision do I get these feelings from? Which decision does this come from? And then the group moves toward the options where they collectively feel consolation, right? Because that's the Spirit, that's the Holy Spirit leading them. Other listening practice that you could do with your decisions, other spiritual practices you could do, Lectio Divina, a breath prayer, a centering prayer, a welcoming prayer, those kinds of things. So when you have all these options in front of you, listen for the promptings of the Holy Spirit. See what that does. And then the last thing, test decisions with rest. It's like okay, we made this decision, how about we sleep on it, right? And then come back to it. That's kind of what that means. So before drawing your discernment to a close, test any decision with rest. Before your choice is shared beyond the group making the decision, sit with your choice in stillness and prayer. Depending on the magnitude of your decision, your rest period, it might be a matter of minutes. It might be at the end of that meeting, you spend 5 minutes and just sitting in stillness with that decision. It might be weeks. If it's a pretty big decision for your congregation, that group might need to sit with that for weeks before they kind of start sharing that out, because they just need to sit in stillness with it and rest with it. Then at the end of the rest period, you would ask each member of the group to share any insights, any spiritual nudging, any unaddressed longing. Ask each group member if they are still able to support the decision moving forward. It is a new day, and fresh practices are born from our ancient traditions, right? These spiritual practices are ancient traditions. But if we use them in a way of decision making, that's a really fresh way of doing that. Yes, discernment practices take time. It's true. But not every decision needs to be approached with a discerning mindset, right? Like some decisions you can just make. Kind of like we have during the pandemic, you had to make those decisions quick. There are still those. But there's others where the ramifications could be huge, that it'll take the time. It'll take time to go through that discernment. So these 5 practices will help leaders let go of the past and discern the next chapter in your congregation's life. All right. Support. How do you get support being a lay leader? Well, your district lay leader, for one. I didn't tell him I was going to say that, but Denny is fantastic. I'm sure he would be happy to have conversations and, talk through some things with you all. A second one is our Congregational Resiliency Catalyst. We have a team of clergy and lay in the Michigan Conference who are trained in congregational resiliency. They are available for congregations really seeking to function in healthier ways. It doesn't mean that you're in all kinds of conflict, it doesn't mean that your church is about to die or close or whatever. It's for congregations who are just seeking to function in a healthier ways. They go through this process with folks to kind of help transform that conflict and become a little bit healthier. Another support system is transition coaching that we now have in the Michigan Conference. Coaching really helps gain clarity and insights with the presence of a supportive, trained coach. The Michigan Conference offers coaching to leaders experiencing ministry transition. Ministry professionals, pastors, and laity would likely qualify for this gift of transition coaching that we're offering. So if you're new to being the designated lay leader in your church, you might want to consider a coach through the Michigan Conference to kind of help you through that process. I think all of us, well, I should say most of us on conference staff have had or have coaches, and it's really just, you kind of come with your decision that you're trying to make, your issues that you're having, and your coach just helps ask a series of questions that will move you towards action. And it doesn't necessarily mean like, you have a big project that you're working on and your coach will help you, okay, the first session, you ask all these questions and now you know all the answers to the end of the project. It's more of a journey that you take with your coach, and so that is a possibility as well. Leadership Toolbox. It is on the conference website. I included it at the end of that handout. I use a leadership toolbox. I'm the one that puts all that together, and there's always just a series of, something new that might be out there. There's, kind of our standard leadership tools that we use, like spiritual gifts, that kind of thing. But there's lots of stuff on there that might be helpful to you. And that leadership toolbox includes me. Like, I am always here for support of lay leaders and lay leadership, lay people, things like that. I would say in my first 2 years, I think I'm on 3rd or 4th year, I don't know. My first 2 years, the majority of folks who reached out to me were pastors and clergy, which was fine, that wasn't a problem. And now I'm getting to a point where the majority of folks are laity, and so that's been really great. And my email address is on the bottom of that handout, and then I also put some business cards back there too, and that's how you can reach me. All right, so your turn. What else? What's missing? What would you add? What are some tips that you have found that have helped you as a lay leader? What are some tips that, if you're a pastor, that you and your lay leader, have been able to work really well with and have a good relationship? What does that look like for you all? I feel like Ray is going to say something. Back here.
I'm Gus Garman. I'm the lay leader at the Salem Church in Pigeon. I guess the first thing, I've been the lay leader for quite some time, and I think we need to remind ourselves just how busy our pastors are. they're at work 7 hours a day, 7 days a week, or 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, right?
Mm-hmm.
And we have to keep that in mind. So they need help and guidance from their lay leader as to what's going on in the church. I may hear things that they're unaware of. I think it's important that we have a contact with them as much as possible. Those that work during the day are going to find it difficult to do that, but keep in mind they really need our help, and we should try and help them any way we possibly can. Thank you. Brian, there you go.
See, Ray, I knew you had something. You're welcome.
So my kind of question is this. Relatively new pastor in a relatively new charge, so to speak, gonna have a new lay leader. And what would be your suggestions to help everything moving forward?
Yeah, I would say setting up a regular meeting time, whether it's once a month or, every week in the beginning since they're new. And honestly, starting by kind of going through the booklets together. What are the responsibilities of the lay leader? What is the responsibility of the pastor versus the lay leader? What can that particular lay leader do and not do? I mean, there's some stuff on these responsibilities that it's like, you know what, I work full time, I have children, I have like all these other things. I can't do all these things in this book, and that's okay. But I think the pastor and the lay leader really need to have that conversation early on to figure out what that looks like. Every church is different. Every church has a different context. Sometimes you could have a lay leader and an associate lay leader that the associate could be responsible for some of the things while the lay leader is responsible for other things. Delegation is always an option, delegate some things. And start by just, getting to know each other. Those would be my recommendations.
Yeah, Laura, one comment I'd like to make. I'm Denny Wissinger. One of the things that the district superintendent and I did shortly after he took over as district superintendent was to just sit down, talk, decide what job description was. I called it marching orders. He called it expectations. But it's a good idea to sit down and talk about it and put it into writing as to what the expectations are of the pastor and what just how it all fits together. Mm-hmm. So that might be helpful, Pastor Ray, and for everybody else.
Yeah, I mean, again, communicate, and then communicate some more. All right. Okay. So, to kind of wrap up, summarize what we've talked about here, and then we can do a specific Q&A session about all this if you're interested. The lay leader should be a growing Christian disciple who understands that everyone has spiritual gifts. Everyone has spiritual gifts. I do a spiritual gifts workshop, and I always get the question of, what if I take this spiritual gift inventory and I don't have a spiritual gift? That's not possible. It's not possible. Everyone has spiritual gifts. And everyone has experiences, right? Everyone has their story to tell that are just so important and that are vital to the body of Christ. The lay leader should be a living example of one who loves God and loves neighbor. It's important for a lay leader to listen well and communicate with people of all ages. Part of that communicating between, the pastor, clergy, and the lay leader is listening, right? We didn't really talk about that when we got to that section, but listening is a huge piece of that too. The lay leader should show interest in connecting the congregation with their community in the world. as they participate in God's mission through 5 charges. The Great Commandment, Matthew 22, 37, 39, to put love of God and neighbor above all else. The Great Commitment, Matthew 16, 24, to embody God's love individually through spiritual disciplines. There's that spiritual discipline piece again. The Great Requirement, Micah 6, 8, to love God, or to live God's love through our actions. And the last one has 2. The Great Commission, Matthew 28, 19 to 20, to go into the world, right? That first part is go into the world by making disciples, baptizing and teaching while sharing God's love. That's that second piece of that. Overall, I went a little too fast. Overall, an effective lay leader functions as the primary representative and model of Christian discipleship and faith lived out in the church and in daily life. The lay leader works with the pastor or clergy to fulfill the mission and vision of the congregation. All right, so before we get to questions, based on what we've talked about this morning, whether you're a lay leader or pastor clergy, we can all participate in this. What are 2 things that you're going to do next? What are 2 things that you're going to take away from today and implement in the next month? You can think about it for a minute or 2. Yeah. Yeah.
Because I really feel that my gift, I know my gift, is public speaking, and I'm going to go.
All right, we have a future certified lay speaker in our midst. She's going to take the basic class and then take the advanced class and then work her way through certified lay speaking. That's great. Thank you. That was more than 2, by the way. All right, anybody else? Who else? Yeah, Mary.
I'm going to ask my congregations in the beginning, how is it with your soul? I'm going to start my services with that.
That's great. Thank you.
As a pastor, I guess I'll be more proactive in setting up times to meet with my lay leader as well.
How about one more?
I have 3 things. Communicate, communicate, communicate.
Yes! Yes! I love that. Okay, so we do have some time. If you have any questions about anything we've talked about today, if there's other people in this room that can answer some of these questions, I hope it wasn't too much information, but it was just enough. It's just enough to get your mind moving. Anybody have any kind of overall questions?
This is kind of a strange question, but when as a lay leader to decide that maybe it's time to step down? That you're not in sync with the pastor or with the congregation? I mean, it's not necessarily an easy thing to talk about, but sometimes ministry comes to an end, so just thoughts on that.
Yeah, I have dealt with this before in different types of situations, and my question usually comes from, is this your passion? Is this where you feel you're best serving the church? maybe there's another role that you could fill based on your passions and your gifts, right? Like that would start that conversation and at least get them thinking of like, oh, yeah, I really don't have the gift to do this. I just like to. And then, once they really kind of discern that and understand what their passions and gifts are, they might find a role that would be better suited for them. I would say if it's a long-term lay leader, it might be time for that congregation to kind of talk about term limits and say, okay, we look at this on an annual, the lay leader's elected annually, let's see who's ready to be the next lay leader. I think mentoring is a big thing for this position especially. It's a good idea for whoever is the lay leader, especially after maybe they've done it for a year. Start looking for that next person that they can mentor up into that role. I think it's helpful to start with passions and gifts. And if they say, yeah, I'm very passionate about this, like this is my gift, this is where I should be, well then maybe the conversation is, okay, well let's reevaluate what that could look like.
Is there a meeting for lay leaders to get together? Like we have our D zones. Is there, opportunities for the lay leaders to come together and talk how it is with their soul?
Yeah, it is district by district, so it would depend on what's happening in the Central Bay District.
It is something that we are striving to put together. It just hasn't come together quite yet. So it's in a process.
Mm-hmm.
We did it for a while, but the response wasn't very good.
Yeah.
One of the blessings is that we now have an actual list with contact information, so that may help us to coordinate this a little bit better.
Honestly, that's the hardest part about district and conference level work is just like the contact information of lay leaders and lay servants and all that kind of stuff. It's a challenge. Any other questions? All right, I'm really grateful you all were here on this beautiful Saturday morning. This has been a real joy and a real treat for me to kind of put this together, and it's nice to be in person. Like, I'm just gonna say it, it's nice to be in person. Yeah. If we don't have anything else, I do want to close with another September 11th remembrance prayer. It's been heavy on my heart this week, and so I think it's appropriate to end with that. So any other housekeeping things or? Okay, make sure you get food on your way out. Make sure you get booklets on your way out. Oh wait, you had your hand up?
Well, I hope this is appropriate, but I do have brochures on your way out. If you would like an opportunity to do a day mission site in Saginaw, Newhart, I have those brochures on your way out.
Great, thank you. That's absolutely appropriate. All right, let's pray. Oh, yeah. Oh, thank you. Thank you. I forgot. So there are feedback forms that were with your worksheet. If you could just fill those out and leave them on this front chair would be helpful. That way I can collect them and I can better this up for next time, or if there's any information that you want from me, feel free to put that on the worksheet also, because I'll look at all those. That would be really helpful for me to get some feedback. Thank you very much for bringing that up. I always forget that. All right, let's pray. We remember, God of history and remembrance, We remember when the towers fell and lives were lost. We remember the dust and the smoke, the despair and the grief. We remember that sense of vulnerability and shock. We remember the numbness that overwhelmed us as we watched our screens for hours and hours, waiting for an explanation and understanding that never came. We remember God of hope and presence. We remember those heroes, those who rushed to help, who guided the wounded down innumerable flights of stairs, who rose to overwhelm those who held death in their hands. We remember the hours and the days of binding wounds and healing hurts, giving comfort, drying tears. We remember words of support and compassion from nations far and wide. We see the ripples of that tragic day continue to impact our world 20 years later. We grieve with allies today as our allies grieved with us 20 years ago. And together we wonder if there will ever be an end to violence, to war, to hatred, to death. We grieve our world's inability to learn the things that lead to peace. We call to you now in our remembrance, God of justice and of peace. Give us a will to truly pray that your kingdom may come on earth as it is in heaven. Amen.